Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Takedown, our series of unfiltered conversations about tobacco and advocacy within communities most impacted by the tobacco industry. My name is Camille Sanchez, Associate Director of Community Outreach here at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Today, we are joined by Dr. Valerie Yerger, who is a licensed naturopathic doctor and professor in health policy at the University of California, San Francisco. She is also a founding member of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. For almost 20 years, the overarching goal of Dr. Yerger's work is to frame the disproportionate burden of tobacco among marginalized communities as a social injustice, and to inform public health policies so they effectively reach these communities. Dr. Yerger, thank you for joining us today on The Takedown.
Thank you for inviting me to come on board.
Absolutely. Dr. Yerger, enormous progress has been made to reduce smoking in recent decades, but there are still wide disparities in tobacco use today. What are the remaining challenges ahead to help reduce these inequities?
Yes, thank you, Camille, for that question. Wonderful question. I, as a naturopathic doctor, I have a different spin on responding to that question than many of my colleagues might. But I do want to also recognize my work as a tobacco documents researcher at UC San Francisco. I've been looking at these documents for over 20 years. And I think in the field, we've done an excellent job looking at the supply side of this epidemic. We are very well versed on the tactics that the tobacco industry uses to target marginalized communities. We know that they use pretty much a cookie cutter approach. They got their teeth into the African American community pretty early on, starting in the 60s. And we see a lot of those same tactics have been used to target the LGBTQ community, definitely youth and other communities of color. So we have a pretty good handle on how the tobacco industry does what it does in terms of predatorily marketing their products to communities that are dealing with a lot of inequities and have a lot of other issues that keep them from being able to live the kind of life quality that they would have in their community. And so I also think that one of the things that we can focus on is the demand side. Unfortunately, there are a lot of social, health, educational, economic inequities that drive the use of tobacco products. Individuals who are dealing with a lot of stressors they're in pain. They're trying to self-medicate. Tobacco is readily available. They see the advertisements and probably have seen the advertisements in their communities ever since they were a kid walking to and from school. So it's become part of the norm for a lot of communities that are low income and dealing with a lot of inequities. You go into more affluent communities, you don't see the same advertising. You don't see the same habits or the same numbers even of corner stores that are selling these products. And so if you're a young child and you're growing up in these communities and you see these products, you see the ads, you think that that's the norm. So dealing with the supply end takes care of that. But what we're not doing enough of is thinking about how it is that we can get people to recognize that they don't need to turn to smoking to deal with their stress. I know that we're talking about stress more. Stress is becoming more popular in cessation curricula, but it's not enough just to be able to identify the stressor and then try to deal with how it is you manage that stress. We really need to look at the underlying causes of why people are dealing with stressors, and those are the inequities in this country.
Your research has exposed much of the insidious tactics that the tobacco industry uses to target Black communities, especially with menthol cigarettes. Now, the FDA is hopefully months away from issuing a final rule to ban menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. Can you elaborate on what this rule would mean for Black health and other communities targeted by the industry?
Yeah, many of us are waiting for the FDA to take action against these products. Some of us have been waiting since 2009. Some of us even prior to when the family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act was signed into law back in 2009. I was actually probably one of the first researchers to notice in that legislation before it became law that on the list of flavored cigarettes that would be banned, menthol was excluded from that list. And I was the one that picked up the phone and called, at the time it was Bill Robinson, who was the executive director of NAPTN, which is now called the Center for Black Health and Equity. And at first, it took a while to convince him that we needed to do something, but he had access to community advocates across this country that I didn't have. And he was the one that brought to the attention that we had a serious problem. So yes, we're hoping that the FDA is going to take some action. And if they do, those of us who have been in this work for quite a while probably are going to continue to hold our breath. Because once you get a law enacted, then you have to deal with issues of enforcement and what does that look like. And there are pieces along the way of getting legislation passed and implemented and enforced where the tobacco industry inserts its tactics to disrupt the work that we're doing. So along the way of being able to eventually get these products out of the hands of our young children and other marginalized communities, we have to deal with the tobacco industry showing its ugly head. So we don't know what that's going to take at the federal level. We're doing what we have in our hands to do, which is to hold the FDA accountable. They have had the information, they have had the research, they have had the evidence for over a decade, and yet they still have not taken any action to protect those. And if you think in terms of the number of years that have gone by, there are families who have lost loved ones. And if we look at just within, you asked about the African American community, and you look at 45,000 African Americans die every year, that doesn't even take into account the African Americans who smoke, who are still living, who don't have any decent quality of life because of the effect of smoking. And very often you reach a certain age before you start having some of the health problems associated with smoking. And in the African American community, we're talking generally about older family members who have other responsibilities. Many of us aren't able to retire. We have other responsibilities of taking care of our family and household, including caring for our grandchildren and also our great-grandchildren. And we're doing so without being in a position of being healthy. So those numbers aren't even included when we talk about it. And that 45,000 African Americans who die every year, they don't even include the numbers who have died because of secondhand smoke. And now we're just now looking at the effects of thirdhand smoke. So we're talking about a very underreported effect from smoking these products that just does not get captured when we talk even just about the 45,000 who die every year. So because of that, it has forced us to think, well, what if the FDA doesn't act? And what if the FDA acts, but it doesn't act as fully as it can? What are some of the other things that we can focus on? So within the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, we kind of figured out early on that if local jurisdictions can take this issue on, they can't have any sort of impact on what gets manufactured, but they can definitely have an impact on the sales of these products. And so as we wait on the FDA to make their decision, we continue to work at the local and the state levels. Now, the thing that's very, very important about all of this is that this is where we are building our community capacity. We don't build community capacity just focusing on the FDA. We build our community capacity working at the local and state jurisdiction. And for African Americans in particular, it is important to get us engaged. It is important to have us at the table. It's even more important for us to even figure out which table we're going to sit at and invite others into our community to help us. because it's so vital and vitally important, because it is our African American leaders who historically, and as it's shown in the tobacco documents, our leaders are the ones that the industry rely on very heavily to disrupt tobacco control efforts throughout the country.
So we need to build community capacity, hold big tobacco accountable to save lives, right? Ultimately, that is our goal here. So this rule certainly has the potential to encourage many smokers to quit and save an enormous amount of lives. But a huge part of that equation is ensuring that people have the necessary resources to successfully quit. What priorities should we be focusing on to develop more effective and equitable cessation resources?
Yeah, I love this question, and it's not one that we were really asking just a few years ago. I mean, I think we all know how important cessation is. We also know that it's important to have cessation approaches that are appropriate for the communities that you're dealing with. I mean, obviously, if you're going to try to help young kids, young adults quit smoking, you're going to use a different tactic than you would, say, older white men. And then if you're going to be looking at providing cessation approaches that are appropriate for African American communities, you're going to want to have, for example, tobacco documents that talk about how their communities have been disproportionately targeted by the industry. And if you look at African Americans who smoke, up to 3 out of 4 of them want to quit smoking. And research is coming out to show that when you have those policies in place, that African Americans who smoke menthol cigarettes will tend to just not smoke at all. They don't switch to non-menthol cigarettes. That is what the research is showing. The tobacco industry documents also support that as well. So we know that they want to quit. We know that they need help. Nicotine is extremely addictive. I have worked with people who smoke who have easily stopped taking drugs, but have not been able to quit smoking. And so how is it that you can really provide help to these individuals when you're going to be implementing policies that are going to affect them? I think it's inhumane not to consider that question. And I think that you need to have cessation programs that are appropriate. The problem is there hasn't been a heck of a lot of research to really show which curricula work best, especially within the African American community. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any options out there. One of the things that I have gathered in the years that I've been doing this work, and especially relying on the tobacco documents to talk to the communities and to help them understand that you're not smoking because you're Black or just because of who you are. You're smoking because you live in a community that has been exploited by an industry that relied on you to continue smoking for their own benefit. And that pisses people off when they get that. So there are hooks that are available within the tobacco documents that help our smokers understand, so that they don't self-blame, so that they're not putting themselves down, that they get empowered by understanding why it is they have become addicted to a product that they no longer want to partake in. So if you have curricula, cessation programs that really help smokers to understand that history and understand the influence of the tobacco industry, then we're getting closer to providing resources that are appropriate for those communities.
It's so important, right, in this fight to remind our viewers that we are not anti-smoker, right? We are anti-smoking. So we can back up a bit. I think it's important to acknowledge the role that AATCLC has played in advancing the rule to this point. Can you speak about the history of that work and how AATCLC continues to support the proposed rules today?
We actually, the history of the AATCLC is that we came together right around 2008. Many of us had had a relationship working together prior to that. But the thing that happened that was pivotal for Black African-American tobacco control advocates in the state of California was that many of us were working on projects that were funded by the state to do tobacco control work that was specifically directed towards are particular, what California calls priority populations. These are communities of color, the LGBTQ community. Since 2008, there has been a recognition of rural communities being considered priority populations, as well as those individuals who are dealing with a mental health challenge. So when these projects were no longer receiving funding from the state, some of the individuals went on to do something else, because you need a paycheck to be able to provide for your family. But even still, most of us came together because we felt that the work in California, at least related to the African American community, was not finished. And there was a concern that if we no longer paid attention to the issues of the tobacco industry and the African American community, that these issues would continue to grow. So if we, as the professionals and experts in the field, were no longer going to be focused on it, because this is what we did in our job 9 to 5, then we were going to get distracted. So it was very important for us to come together to really maintain that vision of making sure that we got the information that we had about the role of the tobacco industry in our communities out to the communities. And it has taken years, as you know, just to do this. And there's still so many of us, and not just in California, but throughout the country, who don't understand how tobacco is really a social injustice, and it's one that doesn't have to be. People don't understand that, for example, Newport cigarettes, which is the primary choice of menthol cigarettes for African Americans and others, it's like the #1 menthol cigarette. But the reason why it's the #1 menthol cigarette in the African American community is that back in the 70s, Lorillard, which was the manufacturer of Newports, decided that if they were going to stay in the business, they were going to have to get a bigger chunk of the menthol market, because people who smoked, who were more educated and affluent, were starting to decrease their smoking. But those who were continuing to smoke were the individuals who were still dealing with stress and the inequities. So the industry knew the vulnerability of this community. And so as Lorillard decided that they wanted a bigger piece, they knew that they were going to have to compete against the Kool and the Salem. So just understanding that you smoke a menthol cigarette is one thing, but that you smoke a Newport cigarette is because there was a systemic, strategic plan to get that product into the community and to keep you addicted to it, so that Lorillard could at one point sell their product to RJ Reynolds. I can't remember. I think it was like $23 billion a few years ago. And then shortly after that, RJ Reynolds sold their Newport cigarette along with some of their other brands to British American Tobacco for $53 billion. And that was just in 2017. It was fairly recent. So people don't understand this is big business, and you're the reason why these folks get to make all these billions of dollars, in helping people to understand that it's very important. And if the AATCLC didn't help get that information out there, where was it going to come from? We do see some of the other national partners are doing a great job getting the information, but we have been driving, the AATCLC has been driving, doing the advocacy and the education around this. And I know that you're going to ask me a question about some of the Black organizations, but it was very, very important to get this information into the organizations as well, because, you know, my research showed that practically every major African-American organization was taking money from the industry. So you can't just tell an organization to stop taking money from the industry, especially when you know that people are thinking, oh, we have no influence from the industry. They just give us money. They don't understand you do absolutely have influence. And if you go high enough in your leadership, up the leadership tree, you'll find that those individuals are hanging out with industry execs. And so when you start to share that and you start showing that through the industry documents, you get people within these organizations who get very, very upset. And they're like, wait a minute, I didn't know about this. No, no, no. My grandfather was a part of this organization. No, no, no. But it has to come from within the organization. And so the AATCLC has been very instrumental in helping to educate individuals within these very influential organizations so that the work to change, to denormalize these relationships with the industry comes from the inside out.
The next phase of this fight is preparing for the inevitable opposition from the tobacco industry. If these rules are finalized, the industry is all but guaranteed to try to stop them in the courts. What advice would you give to advocates out there who want to continue to make a difference to protect their communities from tobacco?
Well, as more time goes on and we have more of these local and state jurisdictions passing menthol and flavor bans, the industry has at every step of the way come in with litigation. They have lost every single one. You'll have to fact check me on this, and you can do that by contacting the folks, our friends at the Public Health Law Center. But I think there's been 37 lawsuits, and the industry has lost every single one of them. So they're going to continue doing what they're going to do. I imagine if you file 37 lawsuits, you can probably kick out another one in a matter of a minute or two because you've got it all written and you just change. So it's very easy for the industry to file a lawsuit. But the point is they haven't won, and they're going to continue to not win because there have been precedents set that are very strong and will really enable any local jurisdiction, any state jurisdiction to maintain their laws. Now, at the federal level, yes, the industry is going to come in. The higher up you get in terms of the level of government, it is true that there is more industry interaction with the folks at those levels. So it's harder for us to understand what's happening because we're not there. We don't have the money. We're talking about big bucks money. But so far, the industry has not been successful in getting their cases won. And yes, they're going to continue to fight because that's what they do, that they have the money to do that. And, you know, I think it's pretty safe to say they don't know what else to do. So we know, and you know, and it would be nice if we could get some federal law, because the FDA has the authority to do a lot more harm to the industry than we can do at the local or state level. But again, as I said before, the state and local level is how tobacco control has been done from the get-go. All the smoke-free, tobacco-free laws that we have happened at the local level. So it would be nice. It would make it easier. I think those who are at the federal level should be looking at all of us who've been working our rumps off and say that we deserve to have some joy in our lives and let us go on. You know, you get rid of the industry influence, and then we can focus on helping our family members and loved ones who smoke to quit.
So we continue to encourage our advocates, right, to push for local action in your cities and states and continue making your voice heard until the rules are across the finish line.
Yeah, be a part of this. You know, when you're at a place and you have grandkids and great grandkids and you sit back and say, you know what, I remember when we used to be able to buy those products in the store. You know, I actually, if I can share this is a perfect example for me of being fact checked by a kid who was in middle school. When I went to talk, this was a few years ago, about menthol cigarettes, and thinking that this young kid was not paying any attention to me because she was on her phone. And I didn't call her out. I was just noticing it and feeling a little uncomfortable. But then what she said to me, when she found the Newport, because when I talked about Newport, she didn't know what a Newport was. She says, oh, I know this. My uncle smokes this. So we'll be able to hear our kids say, oh, they used to sell these. So that's what we're working towards. Yeah. Get them out, make them so unknown that people don't know anything about them.
As someone who is newer to the tobacco control movement, I admire your continued dedication and commitment to this issue. Are there any other last tips or advice you would give to young advocates out there looking to make a similar impact on issues they care about?
Yeah, what I would say to you and all the young people who are listening, find your passion. If something makes you angry, you're getting angry for some reason, there's something that's not right. Find others, find a way to be able to turn your feelings, those really very strong feelings, into action that would alleviate the need for those feelings. So with tobacco, we're talking about a social injustice. It is wrong. It is wrong for an industry that knows better to sell products that they know are going to kill folks if they use them. We've heard that before. Tobacco is the only product that if you used as directed, it will kill you. It will eventually kill you. But there are hooks that help us to understand whether it's tobacco or some other industry that is doing something that is just simply wrong. It is wrong for the industry that is aware, for example, that if you smoke cigarettes and you are a person of color and you have melanin, this is just an example, you have melanin. Melanin is the substance that gives us our skin its color. Those of us who are darker skin have higher levels of melanin. The tobacco industry has known since the 50s that nicotine accumulates in tissues that contain melanin. So when you are someone who is brown or darker and you're smoking cigarettes, you are not only accumulating nicotine in your tissues, but you're also accumulating the carcinogens, those substances that cause cancer. That's all the evidence it has been published. We know this. The industry knows it. And the fact that the industry will come into your community and get you to buy a product that they know disproportionately harms you and does it in such a way that if you knew any better, you probably would not even pick up the product, but they don't share that information. You should be very upset over that. That should piss you off. So if you feel pissed about something, there's probably a good reason for it. And I can promise you, you probably aren't the only one who's pissed off about it. So let's find each other. Let's have fun in between, and let's do some good work.
Yeah, absolutely. Find that passion, find what angers you, find your community that can support you in it, and turn those feelings into action.
There you go. Yes.
Dr. Yerger, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It has been a pleasure speaking with you and engaging in such a valuable discussion. Make sure to check out the African American Controlled Tobacco Leadership Council, AATCLC, and Tobacco Free Kids on social media. All of our handles will be in the description below, and stay tuned for our next takedown.
All right.
Check out our other conversations while you're there as well. Thank you again, Dr. Yerger. I hope you have a wonderful day.